Hello, y'all. Welcome to the clock out. Happy Monday. Happy Monday. I hope y'all had a good Monday. I know it's a lot going out in the world all around, but I hope that you are having a good Monday. Today our Today we are talking about how we don't play with toxic bosses, okay? I don't play with toxic bosses. I don't think you should either. So we're going to talk about like how do you know that your boss is toxic, right? A lot of us have these really unfortunate experiences, right? And sometimes we don't really know, what is it us? Are we overreacting or is my boss really actually toxic? Is my boss impacting my mental health? Are they impacting my job? Are they impacting my ability, my paycheck, whatever? So we're going to talk about that today. So if you are here, say hello in the comments. Let me know where you are um, tuning in from, whatever you want to call it. And I, as always, I'm going to go check on the clock app to make sure I am going live there too. I don't see it there yet, but that's okay. That is okay. Sometimes the clock app be playing with me, okay? So give me just 1 second and let me know, say hello in the comments while I wait to see if the clock app is going to behave. There it is. There it is. Woo. Okay. Awesome. I see the clock app now. Okay. So the clock app is TikTok. Okay. So if you don't know me, my name is Mercedes Swan. I go by the Career Love Coach, and I'm honestly on a mission to build a community of Black women online across my platforms in a way that we can really support each other and really pull together to create our Black women bliss era, right? As Black women, we face so much in the workplace, we face so much in the world, and just existing, just existing. And so I want to create a safe community where we can clock out of work, clock out of the stress, clock out of the toxic bosses, and just come together to talk about it, right? So I'll be covering a variety of different topics in the clock out, from careers, business, and building a lifestyle that we love. And so if you're here, just say hello, let me know so that you can clock out of your stress and clock into community. Okay, clock in. Hey y'all on TikTok, welcome to the live. Okay, so before we get started, I kind of want to ask you, like, let's check in. Like, how is your week going, right? If you have a toxic supervisor, it may not be going, it may not be going well, and that's okay. I know. But like either way, I want to hold space for however you're feeling. So just let me know, how's this week going for you? Let me know in the comments, okay? Let me know. Okay, I'm doing pretty good. I hope you are too. Okay. So if you're watching this, also, if this content you're finding it to be helpful, share this with your professional sister in love, right? We need to get more resources like this to Black women so that we can create the careers that we really want to see, right? Thrive, get the paychecks that we need, the promotions, the titles. And I think having conversations like this is something that's super helpful for us to be able to move forward. So I called this episode of The Clock Out. It's handled, okay? Because we're going to go Olivia Pope on your supervisor, right? We're not going to go, we're going to play the game, okay? We're going to know about the ins and outs of really connecting and really, in many ways, like handling a toxic supervisor, right? Because I think a lot of the times we leave it up to our supervisor to figure it out. Hey, y'all, welcome into the live. Make sure that you like it and leave me a comment and say hello if you are here and enjoying this content. Okay, so I always like to share a story, right? And I have, of course, I share my story with working in a toxic environment, working with a toxic supervisor, and how that has impacted me. But for the purposes of this story and communication, I think it's important to know because when I was interacting with this toxic supervisor, I often felt like I had to shrink to keep myself safe, right? Like if I'm bringing something to you. Like if I'm in and I was in a management role, right? If I'm in a management role or I'm in a role where I've been hired to impact change, drive projects, do things better, improve things, streamline things, right? That's always been indicative of who I am. But if you're tasking me to do this and then I come back to you and I do this, right? I come to you and I tell you about the challenges, things we can change, ways that we can improve the world and our work, not the world. I mean, we can't improve the world, but our work, right? But then I take the brunt of the challenge, right? Like, oh, I've done something wrong, I've said something wrong, I'm not managing something the right way. That kind of leads you into the cycle of saying like, oh, I'm kind of getting penalized for doing what you've asked me to do, right? And so in this case, a lot of times it actually reduces us to no longer be performing, right? Because if at performing level, right? We should be saying, okay, here's this project, here's this task. I'm going to complete it. I'm going to drive it. And then when you get in trouble for it, then you kind of shrink back, right? You kind of say, oh, well, um, I guess I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do it that way, right? And so then we end up underperforming, and then we shrink, and then we don't speak up, we don't speak out, we don't recommend ideas, we don't try to make changes, we don't try to make improvements, right? Because we are tired of being just thrown under the bus, dragged for doing our jobs. And I think this is a lot of times where we see the quiet quitting and some of the language with Black women about, oh, I didn't, what is the word? It's like I don't dream of labor, right? And it's really shutting us off from enjoying the work. And I think all of us really do deserve to enjoy the work that we do. As somebody who's really passionate about my work, I've done human resources, I've done DE&I. I love doing the work that I do. I love making change. I loved improving things for employees, right? But being walked on and being thrown under the bus and being blamed for doing my job was just something that really just took a big toll on my mental health. But I also had to have a moment where I had to really critically think about what was going on. I started to ask questions. I started to kind of define like figure out what was going on. Like, why was this truly happening, right? Is it really about me? Or is it more about my environment? Is it more about my supervisor at the time, right? And those are some of the conversations that I want to start to have with you today. So if you're listening to this and any of this is resonating with you, again, you felt like, you've had to shrink to be safe, that you couldn't speak up, that you had low psychological safety at work, let me know. Or even that you were gaslit to think to ask, like, oh, come do this, come say this, but then they don't really want it. I know we've all been there. Hey CJ, welcome to the live. Um, so I think the challenging thing with this, right, is that in order for us to do that, we do have to step out of the shrinking. We do have to step out of the mindset that says, let me back away, kind of like that fight or flight. And we have to start fighting, because us being able to really talk about it and having direct and sometimes even uncomfortable conversations with our toxic supervisor is what's going to lead to change, right? If we normalize, or I mean, it is normalized already, but if we continue to normalize the toxic behavior and how they're treating us, right, it will continue, right? And I will say this. I know that a lot of the times it feels scary, but honestly, if we're able to say we're going to start holding conversations and keeping people accountable to what they say or what they do, I think overall that begins to shift things and it changes how they treat us, right? Because they know that we have a standard of how we will be treated in the workplace. Thank you so much for sharing the live on TikTok. Hey, y'all. Thanks, CJ. Okay. So, honestly, when I started to really think about this, I started to be more strategic about how it was showing up. I think I was trying to honestly fit into some mold. The mold was forever changing, right? The mold was never the same every single day. I had to figure out what the mold was that day. And I think that was one of the most stressful things is like, how do you want me to show up today? I don't know. And I started to ask again those questions of, okay, what are the expectations here? How can we have these expectations and these goals written down so that we're all playing the same game here? We're all on the same level. Also, how do I make connections with other people that know my character and can vouch and support me and be an area like support, right? Provide me feedback so that I kind of understand and know what I'm doing and how I'm moving forward. Thanks, LinkedIn user. Thanks for the love. I don't know who you are. Sometimes it tells me who you all are or who you are not, but just know thank you so much, LinkedIn user, for loving that point. All right. So I think part of this is like it is about the relationship with you and your supervisor, but it's just as much as it is about yourself, right? Because one of the things that I notice is that me trying to appeal or meet the needs of that toxic supervisor led to me being out of my character, right? Like who I want to show up with, how I support others. And I'm specifically talking about like my optimism, my desire to help others, my desire to it's like support others, right? So if you see other people, especially as a manager, right? If you see other people who have a high potential, right? And you want to grow them, you want to help them advance, right? But you have this pressure coming from downward that's like, oh, we're not supporting this type of growth in people. One, I don't understand why that makes sense, right? And I'm not going to put all the business out there, right? But it doesn't make sense, and it also doesn't help the organization to try and keep other people small, and so I felt like that downward pressure of trying to align to that, which brought me outside of my character, right? Because now, if you do Gallup strengths out there, right, you may know what those are, right? There, you can take a quiz, an assessment, and you can see basically what your top strengths are. One of my top strengths is maximizer, which is my continuous improvement kind of area of expertise where I like improving systems and processes. And I also like developing people. I really love giving back to other people to help them grow, right? So because of that, I was coming outside of my character. So I just want to give some really big examples of like how sometimes it's not just about the dynamics and the emotions, it's also about who you are and how you show up, right? And I think it's important for all of us to be able to show up as our full authentic selves in the workplace. Like that's what this is all about. So let me know in the comments, has something like this happened to you? Have you shrunk? Have you felt powerless? Have you kind of tried to shape or mold yourself to fit into the context of the workplace? It's it's a little bit like I know, but like, so let me know what your experiences with that is in the comments. And hello, welcome in. If you're on TikTok and YouTube specifically, I don't really know how the LinkedIn algorithm works, but give us some likes for this live. It helps the live to get pushed out to more people. And also, if you share it with others, that helps get pushed out. If you're on LinkedIn, you can always repost this. That helps a lot too. Okay, thanks. All right, so let's get into it, right? Because some of us, we don't really know. Like we gaslight ourselves a little bit. We're like, no, it's not really that bad. Or maybe I'm just making it up. Maybe I'm being dramatic. My other peers are having these same issues, right? Like how do we truly know that we have a toxic supervisor? I always say to my clients, like your discomfort is enough, right? So if we're in, thank you for the likes. Run it up. um, but one of the things that I always say is that like our discomfort is enough, right? Sometimes we hear the signs, sometimes we have intuition about why something's happening, even though we don't have all the facts. And I think that sometimes like us subconsciously seeing or understanding dynamics that we don't really quite lean into or examine more. And so I would say my first thing is just to start to listen to comfort is enough for saying for agreeing that you have a toxic supervisor and for saying, you know what, I'm going to exit, right? Because go watch the live. Was it Friday? Last live was I was talking about the impacts, the long-term impacts for Black women by staying in toxic environments. So one thing that I immediately noticed as a sign for a toxic. Oh, by the way, if you have any signs of toxic supervisors as I'm going through this, let me know. Let me know in the comments, okay? I would love to know. I would love to keep adding to this list, okay? But for me, it was gaslighting or dismissing concerns, right? So sometimes I would have that individual come to me and tell me something to do, ask me to do something, or it would be a complete change in direction. The individual would not be open to me asking questions about that. They would not be open to actually like listening to process, right? And so that got me into a lot of issues, right? Because I didn't just go along with what that person said, right? And so a lot of times because they don't want to deal with the conversations of why something's happening, they instead gaslight you saying like, oh, that's not a process, or that's not how that was written, or that's not how that was supposed to be done. And then they dismiss your concerns, right? It's like, no, I'm not crazy. This doesn't align. I know what I know to be true, right? Especially when you are a part of building those processes in the beginning. And that's a whole nother story. But like if you have a supervisor that does not listen to you and instead kind of gaslights you, toxic boss number one. And it's usually because they're not confident in their leadership style. Okay. And so they feel challenged by you when you ask those questions versus like a leader who is secure in their leadership will have those conversations with you. Okay. And they won't feel threatened by it. Okay. Micromanaging or withholding resources, right? So again, this is all from a lack of, right? And I feel like that toxicity, like there's this quote that hurt people come to work, like people with trauma come to work. And so we don't just leave all of that outside the door when we come into work, right? We bring the challenges, the insecurities, the lack of confidence, and even the challenges that we face in life to work with us, right? They don't just disappear, right? And so if we have a desire to control life, or we have a desire where we feel like if we give other people resources, we don't have enough, like that's a mindset of lack, that shows up in our leadership skills, that shows up in our leadership style, right? So unless we begin to think about that, we just continue that cycle. Excuse me. Sinuses are upset. Um so in my case, right, I was denied training, I was denied resources. I was not given the opportunity to learn things that other people were learning. And then also everything that I did was nitpick. So not only was I not given the correct training, I had to figure out everything myself. When I was finally able to meet what they were asking about, I mean, I shouldn't say finally, like it was a quick, it was a quick thing of me figuring out, wait a second, I got to do this myself. Right. And so toxic supervisors, I think, especially if they're trying to negatively impact you, like they don't want to deal with you anymore, they don't want to really work with you, they're going to deny you resources, they are going to deny you understanding and support, and they're also going to nitpick what you do, right? So this kind of leads to this idea of like, I'm trying to set you up for performance failure, right? And that happens a lot. Excuse me. Okay, this one's simple, like taking credit for other people's work, right? Like if you have a supervisor that doesn't recognize people, that doesn't see their value, that doesn't spend time like really investing in the team in terms of like seeing them grow, seeing them do things that are independent that would help them to grow, right? One of the things that's absolutely true from a professional and career development standpoint is having the opportunity to do things, to show your skill set, right? To drive projects start to finish, to have ownership, right? And that's how a lot of times Black women are not able to move forward or to feel confident to move forward in the next step of their career, because they're like, oh, well, I haven't had any experiences doing that, right? And that's how a lot of times they really like keep us small, because they're like, oh, you're not ready to be a supervisor. You're not ready for that, that growth opportunity. But it's like you also haven't made any attempts to provide that to me, right? And when I was talking about it a little bit earlier about my character, the maximizer, like that's so obvious to me. Like you don't want to see me grow. You're stopping my projects, you're not letting me move forward. Toxicity. Okay. CJ said on TikTok, going through that right now. Yes, it's so common. So let me know if any of these are resonating, if there's any other red flags that you have seen, because yes. Ugh. Okay, the next one is creating a hostile or unsafe work environment. I know that like there was some discourse on a different post that I made on LinkedIn a little while ago about like, oh, we're just calling everything toxic now. It's like, are we calling everything toxic now, or just more aware of what's not okay? And like it doesn't mean that like our lives are in jeopardy, right? But that doesn't mean that it minimizes the impact that it has on our mental and emotional health, right? And so being yelled at, feeling attacked, feeling like your job is at risk, right? It's like a leader who knows that your job is at risk, or maybe knows that you're underperforming, will have transparent conversations with you so that you're able to adjust those, right? Supervisors who don't want you to be successful, and they kind of want to again control and minimize you, are going to attack you. They are going to speak ill of you, right? They are going to make you feel unsafe and insecure in you, right? Because then that allows them a greater opportunity to try and control you, right? Like that's the realness of it. And the same thing is on your personal like attacks on your personal character or abilities, right? And so I would have conversations where I would be like, hey, this doesn't make sense. Also, I was talking about those concerns, right? This doesn't make sense based on what our practices are, like what we do. And so I would have conversations where I would be asked, like, why don't you understand? Like, why can't you do this? Like, you just need to do this. And it's like, no, I don't need to just do this. That's illegal, or that's not our policy, or whatever. Like sometimes those have been real conversations that I've had. And sometimes those conversations have also impact other Black women. They have, and I've been in HR, right? So these conversations that I'm having are not just like, oh, it's like, that's not how we put together a PowerPoint. Like, no, these are practices that are impacting real people and their jobs and their potential job. You know what I'm saying? Like, these aren't silly things. And so by attacking your character, right, you're kind of taking away from like what I'm actually trying to accomplish or where I'm trying to go with you. And that is like, I think, a really common tactic of toxic supervisors. And the last thing that I'll say is like moving expectations, goals, or duties, right? So you go into a meeting with them and they're like, oh, this is what I want you to do. And then you go do it and you come back and they're like, oh, that's not what I wanted you to do. Like, is it? Like, do we have a misunderstanding, right? And so we're gonna talk about, a lot of those different tools or resources that like you can use. But have I missed anything that you feel like is a sign of a toxic boss? Have I missed anything that you noticed? Anything that you see in your toxic boss that you're like, wait a second, is that toxic or is that just me? Let me know. Welcome to the live, y'all. I see y'all. Hey, y'all. Make sure to give us some likes. Okay, so I always think with this, right? Like, I get it. Sometimes we don't like our jobs. Sometimes we are really frustrated in an organization. But sometimes it's not really our supervisors. And I know that's like a legitimate thing of like, is it really me? And so I think sometimes when we feel like we have a toxic supervisor, but we don't, it's because we don't have a good rapport or good communication with that supervisor, right? So my question to you in your self-reflection, it doesn't mean that you're talking to them right now. Like take some time, go get a journal. I don't care how you whatever you do. Meditate on it. I don't care. But like think about it. Like is there something that I can actually do to improve communication or like rapport with this individual? What actions can I take to be more clear about like not only your expectations, right? So if your supervisor is coming to you and doing things that you don't like, maybe your supervisor if we're gonna take it at face value, right? Maybe your supervisor doesn't know that bothers you, right? And I know a lot of us have like this idea of like, okay, we're gonna just make assumptions based on things. But for me, I'm always going to give somebody the benefit of the doubt until they like evidentially it's very clear. Like I have compiled enough evidence to feel really strongly that this is true, right? And sometimes we make certain assumptions. Some of that is based on past workplace trauma. Some of that is based on trauma outside of work, where we make certain assumptions about why somebody is doing something or why they're acting a certain way. And in some cases, like, nope, you're right. You're right. But like, at least find the evidence for that first and always stay within your character no matter what you're doing. Okay. So I had another video. So if you're on TikTok, like you can't go back to see my lives, but if you're on YouTube or and LinkedIn, you can go back to the events on my page and you can see the past live where we were talking about boundaries. But I feel like a lot of times the top toxic supervisor dynamic is because we don't have good boundaries and we don't have good open lines of communication, right? And so sometimes we have not taken the time to actually learn how to communicate with our supervisor. I know like what I never want to start to teach in a way that like prioritizes white people or centers supervisors or managers because I feel like ultimately with the power dynamics of the supervisor having control over your job, whether you keep your job or not in many ways, and some not every time, right? But in many ways, they have that power over you, right? And so I feel like the onus and the responsibility of communication and direction ultimately lies with that supervisor, right? But we also know that often there's poor leadership that's modeled. People don't have the right access to leadership training and development, and so therefore they just continue those cycles. I think a lot about my movement into management. If I just had modeled excuse me, if I had just modeled all of the leadership styles that I had seen in the past, oh my gosh, I would just repeat the cycle, okay? But I was choosing to be a different supervisor, and I think each of us have that piece. Okay, so sorry, I'm digressing just a little bit. But what I'm trying to say here is, please establish some expectations that you have. I'm going to talk about the toxic job search cycle, I think, on Wednesday, and how to break the toxic job search cycle. So, CJ, that was the one that you requested. We're doing it. And like part of it is like setting expectations or standards of how you want to exist, right? In the workplace. And often, if we don't actually know what those are and communicate those to others, one, people don't know a boundary that you have unless you set them in some way, shapes, or forms. And also unless you're intentional about breaking that cycle. Yeah, girl. Doing it. Okay. And unless you're really intentional about breaking that cycle, then people don't what I'm saying? Like people don't know how to meet you there. And you're also going to continue that cycle into another job because you're not aware of like how you're not doing that. Right. So I think so I'm saying it's a balance. And so what I want to say is like this is not going to fix everything. Your supervisor is still accountable for like moving forward and doing the right thing and being a great leader. But like let's talk about it. Okay, so if you want the detailed version of boundaries, go watch the last video. But for right now, like boundaries is about setting it's about what you expect and then what you're going to do if other people don't do what you've expect or what you've asked of them, right? And so we cannot control other people. That is a key piece of that. Is like you cannot, there's no communication, no method or no way that you are going to go to your supervisor and control them, right? You're not, but you're going to let them know what you expect, right? And so for instance, if your supervisor is making comments to you that you don't, um, that you thought was rude or dismissive or disrespectful, right? You can go back to that supervisor and say something like, "Hey, I noticed in our last couple of meetings, you shared some things in that broader group about how I was managing a project. I would really like the opportunity to discuss that with you privately," right? I talked about that last time. You could also say, "Hey, I am always open to feedback, but I would appreciate receiving that feedback in XYZ ways," right? I'm always looking to grow. I'm very dedicated to my work, but it would be very helpful for me to receive feedback in this way, shape, or form, and then share what that is, right? And so for me, I always want feedback to be shared in a way that's actionable, right? Like I want somebody to say, Mercedes, instead of doing this, it would be helpful for me to do this, right? I think leaders who have gone through um, leadership training understand kind of the behavioral pieces of not of being specific versus vague of like, oh, I want you to be more professional. Like, what does professional mean? I could get on this high horse all night and talk about like how professionalism is a product of white supremacy culture and how it's used to kind of penalize marginalized groups in the workplace. Um, but that's not what this is about. Maybe it's another video for that. I'm gonna make a note. Professionalism. Anyway, and so because they're not specific, there's no opportunity for you to change. They can continue moving the needle. They can shift and change and say whatever they want, right? Because they're not specific, right? And then that allows you to always be in the wrong, right? And so now we're going to talk about strategies about how to actually communicate with them. Like I wanted you to understand the boundaries piece because the boundary is the bare minimum is the basis of understanding what you're going to communicate, right? Because if you don't know what you want out of that supervisor, then you're not going to know what to communicate to them, right? Like so that's the piece. Okay, so again, let me know if this is helpful for you, what's resonating, what's not resonating, and also if you have any questions. Like I want this to definitely feel more like a discussion and things that you all have going on because the clock out, right? It's community. Okay, welcome into the live. I see you. Hey T. Okay, so a couple of strategies to kind of prepare yourself, right? So in the case of like a toxic supervisor, the goal is for you to be able to be in a better headspace. Like if you're at the point where your toxic supervisor is actually really impacting your mental health, like how you enjoy your job, like your goal is for safety, security, and also peace, right? But in a way that allows you to not have to shrink, right? Because I think, there's many ways that we could have safety, security, and peace, but then also kind of like minimize ourselves, right? Like, okay. Um, so when a manager makes a rude comment, okay, CJ, I'm gonna come back to that. Like how to address that. Okay. So what I would say first is like to put in systems for people to be accountable, right? So that's what I was talking about of people. Right. So if your supervisor comes to you and they say, I have an issue with the way that you're doing this, or I would like this to be done, right? A lot of times, again, they're setting these different milestones for you. And so a way for you to ensure that not only you, right, if it is an actual you problem, but also them to be accountable to what that is to get clear on the goals, get clear on the expectations, and to start writing it down. So when I was having this issue with the supervisor, we had like this kind of I don't know. Is it like the conversion of like all the issues and the issue, it was kind of like, oh, I noticed that you're like very frustrated. And I was like, I am very frustrated because I feel like I'm communicating things to you. I'm communicating and I'm delivering things to you that I feel like you've asked for. However, when I deliver them to you, it seems like this is not what we originally talked about, right? And I know like a lot of times we can't really chalk a lot of that up to communication because it was not just me who was hearing that, right? It was other members on my team, it was other leaders that were having some understanding or tone of like what was happening and then it wasn't, right? And then every meeting after that, we started writing down every single thing. Hey, welcome into the live, Julie. So I started writing down every single thing that was really happening in our meetings, right? So line by line, what did we discuss? What is the action item? And really being specific. Mercedes said this, manager said this. We are going to do this. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. And it's written, right, in a shared space, captured, documented in a way that we can both be accountable to those things. So now if I go back into a meeting, I say, well, we said this, right? This is what we said on my performance review. This is what we said in that meeting, in that check-in. This is what we said in the project. Documentation. Okay. Which leads us to the second part, which is documenting things. And so a lot of times we do not document things until we're in trouble, like until there's an issue, until our supervisor is upset, right? And a lot of times we don't have those conversations, right? So if there are issues way 6 months ago and we never had the conversation about what's going wrong, suddenly it's a buildup, and it could be a buildup of your supervisor as well as you. And now you kind of have this like critical event where you all are really upset. And then you're past like talking about this in a civil way. Like we want to have these conversations earlier, but we also want to make sure that you're documenting things earlier, right? So if there's an issue, right? Let's say it's on your performance review. You get a performance review, there's a conversation. They're telling you things that maybe aren't on your performance review or another. I see that happen all the time. People are like, I will see people have like, oh, you're doing great. And then they get to their performance review and everything is misaligned and nothing's right, right? So, like, how do you document that, right? And I mean, in ways that like aren't just like saved in your place. Like after you have a meeting, do a follow up. Thank you so much. I appreciate your compliments about my expertise and experience, right? Make sure it's in a formalized process, like especially if you have performance review, performance improvement plans. You could also, I have a client that I was working with recently talking about how she's doing check-ins, right? And so being able to create a document that she's sharing out via email every single week with all of the deliverables, right? And hopefully, right, you understand like what's being asked of everyone so that you're on the same page about what everyone else in the team. So document, document, document. Now, when we talk about things about discrimination or going to HR or being retaliated against for standing on business, talking about what's going on, that's where that documentation is helpful, right? If you don't have that documentation, you get locked out of your computer, whatever, you don't have it to have that conversation, right? And so I think it's a key way to protect ourselves in meetings, backing up of files, those types of things. Okay. Okay. Especially if we get to the retaliation, right? Because that's, sorry, I wasn't supposed to get the ice out of there. Sorry if you're hearing me chew. But honestly, that is a huge, 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 huge issue. Okay, so let me know. Y'all document. I heard that people are using apps for this. There's 2 apps that I've seen. I really need to go do a deep dive. I kind of want to do a video on them to kind of talk about them and like what I think about them from like an HR standpoint. But there's apps that will help you document things from work. Okay, like your products, like coaching conversations, check-ins, that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. Hey, y'all. Hey. Oh, I didn't know TikTok is asking me how long I went live. There's like some competition going on out there. Okay. All right. The next thing is building a support system. So I relationships are everything at work. And I know that like honestly, Black women, it's really hard to figure out who you can trust at work. Like who's truly an ally, who's going to throw you under the bus later. Like who also is culturally competent enough to actually provide you a safe space when things go left. That is so hard. There's definitely been opportunities or things that have happened where I felt like I could really trust somebody, and then it turns out I wasn't. I like to say I'm usually a pretty good judge of character, but yeah. sometimes ain't it. Sometimes it's not right. But I would like you being who you are, you connecting with people in a genuine way is ultimately helpful for your career, right? People want to work with people that they like. And I know you're like, it's work. It's not a popularity contest. Like, I don't come to work for friends. I come to work for a paycheck. And it's like, okay, but maybe we should get to enjoy the work that we do. Maybe we should enjoy others. Maybe we can be humane and civil and kind and like actually have a friendly, dare I say, family oriented environment at work. I know y'all gonna come for me in the comments. It's okay. I still love y'all. Y'all can come for me. But that's how I feel about it, right? And so I feel like even though it can sometimes be hard to figure out who you can trust, I think it's important to build a support system, build connections, and be strategic, right? And I say this because, well, I'm not going to go into detail about who, what, where, when, and why. When I was having issues where I felt like my direct supervisor was basically talking to other leaders in a way that like basically was sharing that I wasn't competent or was not able to perform my job. At that point, they already had strong connections and ties to me. They already knew my work ethic. They already knew what I was capable of doing. I mean, we had worked together, right? And also like I wouldn't say we're friends, right? But like we have a connection, right? They knew me, Mercedes, as a person and what my character was, right? So when those attacks came, it didn't quite make sense. It didn't quite make sense. And that's what I mean about being strategic, right? Like the connections that we build at work and our brand can help us, yes, be elevated, get a promotion or things like that. But it can also help us as we're moving on to different roles. It can help us later on when we need to ask for guidance or advice. And honestly, it is a part of playing the game. Now, I know people playing the game. I know people don't like, "Oh, I don't like politics or whatever," right? Like, you actually don't have to play politics. And to be honest, I understand the political climate of things just because I'm in human resources and I feel like I understand and see patterns and things like that. But it doesn't mean that I play the game because a lot of people play the game by throwing people under the bus, by taking advantage of people, by backstabbing people, two-faced, whatever you want to call it, right? However they play the game. But you can still play the game in the way that like holds your character and allows you to be your authentic self, right? And I think a lot of times when we're able to be ourselves, be authentic, people again understand our character. And if we built a relationship with them, that will come back, right? They will come back to support and defend you, right? And I'm saying that based on real stuff. Okay. And I also had one situation where an individual, like, I think they didn't quite know my character. I hadn't worked with them before. And so I was getting a sense of like, oh, they have some impression of me of like I'm not competent for whatever reason. And then I was able to like say, wait a second, I noticed that this is happening, right? I noticed what's happening politically, even though I'm not going to say it directly. I see it. I'm being strategic. So I went out and was intentional about building a connection with that person, describing why I was saying what I was doing. And like going into that interaction that I have with that person, the person that was responsible for me showing up in the correct way, and helping to, like, guide me, didn't give me the knowledge that I needed, so that's why I showed up incompetent, and I had to clear that up when I was talking to them. Now, I didn't throw anybody under the bus, right? I stayed true to my character, but I was like, "Oh, let me explain to you kind of, like, what's going on and my understanding so that we can get to the same page," and then every other interaction that I had with that person really shifted overnight. So you can be strategic about your relationships, how you're connecting with others, I promise. Okay. So CJ asked a question on here that's like the impacts of going to HR. Um, and I think this is a part of it, right? Because my next point was like really knowing when to escalate, like knowing when you need to go talk to HR, you need to go talk to a higher level supervisor. And I'm not gonna lie to you, there are impacts of doing that, right? Oh, thank you, Neurodivergent Dragon. I love your name and thanks for stopping by to show some love. Hey, girl. Hey. Well, I don't know if you're I think your avatar looks like a beautiful black woman, but I don't know that. Hey. Um, okay, so knowing when to escalate, it really does have like some negative impacts and it can have some negative impacts and implications, right? And I think it's hard because HR isn't always a resource. One of my past lives was like, is HR your friend? I don't know. Are they your friend? And I think a lot of times HR can be your friend if they have the right intentions going forward, right? So a lot of times you're going to go to HR, you're going to provide that documentation. This is what I mean by the documentation. Like, what were the issues? What was going on? What were your requests? How did you ask for support? How did we show or prove that you weren't given the different support or that there was discrimination against you, right? Like other people had different experiences than you, different expectations, right? We talk about like, oh, maybe our white colleagues have a different different expectations for their work than I do. I have a different standard, right? Those are the types of pieces of documentation that you need when you go to human resources. And so you can talk to them and have those conversations about what you're having. A good HR person is going to, whether it's like a full formal investigation, they're going to do some digging, right? They're going to ask you like what's happening, what's going on, the documentation, those types of things. They might do some conversations with other individuals. Thank you for liking the live, Queen of Palmettos. Welcome in. So sometimes they might go in and talk to other people who are engaging with the supervisor. They might talk to the director, and then they might also ask that supervisor some questions as well. But like to understand truly the dynamics of what's going on. I think what really happens is sometimes those not sometimes, a lot of times those investigations are not handled well. Oh, thank you for the love. I don't know what you sent. I appreciate. Oh, you sent me hearts. Thank you. You are so sweet. Thank you. Um, so yeah, a lot of the times bias comes in here, right? So if we have a bias where, we don't believe Black women, we don't support Black women, we believe Black women aren't as competent, aren't as professional, whatever, those things will come in and impact the performance process or the investigation process, excuse me. And then that's where we see those outcomes of like, oh, nothing was found or whatever, right? Like, what was it, a couple weeks ago? I actually think it was like maybe December of last year. I don't know. But like SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Management, has been in some trouble with a lot of HR professionals, specifically um Black women. Black women and Black men who are in human resources. And a lot of it is because they have not really stood on business to support diversity, equity, inclusion, right? And we saw what happened when they just removed the E from diversity, equity, inclusion for SHRM. They removed the equity. Um, and so I think it's kind of telling because they went through an investigation where there was an individual. I do not remember the demographics of this individual. I'm so sorry. But they launched an investigation and they basically found that there was no discrimination. Now, when I think this person filed the lawsuit, was it a lot? I don't know if they went with the EEOC or it was like separate litigation, but essentially that individual was found to be discriminated against, right? And so just because your HR department goes through that investigation process doesn't actually mean that they're going to find things, right? Or that they are going to side with you. So that is the issue, right? If you are being discriminated against, it is quite possible that they are not actually going to conduct a fair investigation, that they may retaliate against you. So maybe they're going to terminate you because your supervisor filed a complaint, or maybe they are going to um, you know, they're going to create a more hostile work environment for you by, again, continuing to disrespect you, not promote you, yell at you. Like, again, there are a lot of different ways that like toxic workplaces show up to like not feeling safe at work, like feeling like you're in danger, like physically or mentally. And so I think that there are a lot of concerns. Thank you so much for helping me meet my live goal, Queen of Palmettos. You're so sweet. Thank you. Um, so I think it is a lot of risk. What I find though is that if you have a supervisor who is set on getting rid of you, right? Yeah, Queen of Palmetto said been there, done that. Yeah, like all of this is a common thing for Black women. But I guess what I'm saying is like it is scary to do those things. There are risks to moving forward and having these conversations, setting these boundaries, standing on business or whatever you want to call it. But also at the end of the day, if you have a toxic supervisor um, who is trying to quote unquote get rid of you by like complaining about your performance, submitting, complaints to HR, writing you up, like all of those things, then if you're not like also submitting documentation and information about the challenges, like you could still end up in the same situation. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then without have ever having complained to HR. There was this case that I saw, and I truly don't remember. I do remember it was a Black woman, and she had gone to her supervisor about like there was a promotion that was open. She had gone to the supervisor and basically asked the supervisor about like whether or not she should apply. The supervisor, in some way, shape, or form, like I don't know how or what, but the supervisor basically told her that she didn't think she was, capable of getting a promotion, whatever. And then after she wasn't granted the promotion or wasn't hired. And now I don't know like if it was like because somebody was hired and she found out, oh, they're not qualified or they're not skilled. So now I'm gonna sue because maybe she was like, oh, well, I could have got the job if this person got it. I don't know what was the catalyst of doing that. But she ended up going to sue and they threw out her suit because essentially she never applied for the opportunity, right? Because she never submitted the documentation to kind of share that she was being considered, right? And it's different, right? But it's the same idea of like, if you don't have the documentation in place, if you haven't followed a process to make a complaint or say that something was discriminatory or that you are being mistreated, it's harder to kind of go back and follow that paper afterwards, right? So those are the negative, because you all are wanting kind of to understand the negative impacts of like going to HR. Those are all negative impacts. Like I don't want you to make a decision where you're like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea Mercedes told me to just go to HR. And I hope that like all of you like have an HR department that is fair and equitable, right? Like that's so much of the work that I did in my jobs, but like yeah, it's definitely a risk, and like be open and play your cards right by having the documentation in place. Okay. So let me go read some comments. So if you all have any questions, please let me know. Okay, so Queen of Palmetto, okay, was saying, I've been there, done that. How do you know when to get an employment lawyer? Okay, so yeah, okay, so they're basically on TikTok, they're talking about whether or not there are black people, black HR professionals, black lawyers, black employment lawyers specifically, that work on this. So yes, there are. I haven't been on Instagram because honestly, it was some of y'all getting filtered. Oh, of course, Wells Fargo HR does not play fair. Okay, I'm sorry. Wait, let me see the question. Okay, yes. So there are. I don't want to make. I truly don't want to make any recommendations of like when to seek legal guidance. Right. I think it's hard to know like where you are and where you stand with human resources if their processes are not clear. So I would always say like go find out about their processes, try and go through that process. But if you feel like you're not going to get the support, that you are being discriminated against, you can always go file with the EEOC. You can always go find a lawyer. I don't Yeah, I don't have a clear statement or strong recommendations of like when, right? Um, I know that like in most cases with people that I've worked with, or that people who sued the organization that I worked with, may have not worked with, allegedly worked with, it was usually after they were terminated. Okay, so I don't really know. But I also know that some people have done it beforehand and it helped to protect their jobs through that period of time, all of the things. But yes, there are HR professionals, HR lawyers, employment lawyers that will basically support you, or they will give you guidance on some of those things. Hey, Nikita, welcome. Welcome to the live. That you can go get resources from. Somebody on TikTok said basically they have retainers and firms that help to do that, right? So yes, and the point the Queen of Palmettos was sharing is like we are not alone. Like as Black women, we do have resources out here, right? So I think part of it is like I come from this HR background of saying like this is how HR processes and systems work. Like they're going to launch an investigation if they're doing things right. They're going to have a process to submit a claim if they're doing things right, or excuse me, a complaint, not a claim. And so you can navigate those systems, but you also do have legal protections in place where you can get that support. Okay. All right. You're not alone. Okay. So yeah. So again, I haven't seen any on Instagram, but there are quite a few on LinkedIn. So if you kind of just Google, usually it's, you could do like lawyer, Black women, legal protection, civil rights, Black women, and you could probably find that. Okay. Oops. I accidentally scrolled away from the comments on TikTok. Okay, so sorry, the thing that came up was TikTok. Wait, on TikTok was Wells Fargo does not play fair. So anyway, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to say about Wells Fargo in terms of their status with diversity, equity, inclusion. They have done a lot of things that have impacted Black families, Black people, particularly a lot. I strongly believe that a lot of their predatory practices impacted Black people. I did have a Wells Fargo account. I did close it. I moved to PNC and then I moved to Capital One. Like I don't play with Wells Fargo, but I had a student account where they were not supposed to be like deducting money from my account, and I would every month have to go over to Wells Fargo and ask them to give me my money back. Right. So I just feel like there's a lot of processes and systems that just don't make sense from the external piece for Wells Fargo. And so I would see that their employment practices would be the same. My point of really not messing around with Wells Fargo even before I close, sorry, that was after I closed my Wells Fargo account because of those issues with them, just because I wasn't a good customer experience, but it didn't really have to do with the social piece. But like essentially they came out and said, oh, they can't hire any black people and like executives because they're not out there. It's like, are they not out there or do you not know how to recruit them? And are you using that as an excuse? And like employers will do that all of the time, right? HR. Okay. So we have some of these questions. Okay, Queen of Palmettos, not you getting on me. HR is there for the company, not you. So I did have another live about that. And again, you can't get to my lives on TikTok, but if you go on YouTube and you go on LinkedIn, you can see the lives that I posted for that. There are many HR professionals that are really dedicated to employees. And I will say, like, I don't know, go call one of the employees and see what they have to say about me. But I always knew I had a really good rapport with my employees and they really trusted and respected me overall. Um, and they would honestly come to me for guidance and advice, like not just in a way like you want to like file a complaint, but like, hey, Mercedes, I need help, or hey, I'm having this issue with my supervisor. And I created space for those employees to come and talk about that. And the reason why I think it's challenging to say like HR is there for the, even like HR people that say this, like HR is there for the company, but if you are doing right by employees, you are there for the company, right? If you are protecting the legal rights, if you are creating a safe space for people to work, I promise you are protecting the company. If you value diversity, if you value diverse staff, and you want to see a company grow, there's no better reason than to create an environment that they can exist in that's protecting the company, right? We have all the, like, you know what? Y'all got me going on TikTok, okay? Because we see things like this right now with the metas, right? Who are coming out. The DEI content is tomorrow, right? Because I already had this scheduled, but I was a little spicy yesterday. Okay, I was upset over the weekend about DEI. I'm also upset about some other things, about the Red Note app and the Meta and the our black owned apps. What I'm saying is that an organization who has the right people at the table who are diverse are more likely to be innovative. They're more likely to have better decision making. And so they don't become the dinosaur that is Meta right now. Like their constant goal to rebrand to Meta, people were like, what is this supposed to do? What does this mean? And I feel like it's because unless you really are intentional and programmatic and really see the growth and development of people of color, of black women, of black professionals, other individuals who are marginalized, the LGBTQ plus community, unless you have all of those diverse thoughts in place together, like, no, like you would not have those types of outcomes where your organization is dying, right? And we talk about the glass cliff, right? We talk about the glass cliff and like, why is it that black women are asked to lead when things are downwards, right? I think we lead in such a different, authentic, innovative, creative, 10 times harder kind of way when they need us, right? Um, and if we had more black women at the table earlier, then we wouldn't be in these issues that we have now, right? If we had more people of color, if we had more black men, if we had more LGBTQ plus people in the right places, we would have those diverse thoughts and we would be able to innovate and create. Okay. Whew, okay. So this is what we need to know to do our job. Okay. We're hired, overworked, and then forced out. There's a reason many of us do this and yes, and go start a business. Okay. 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 So what we got going on TikTok is all the neurodivergent girlies are over there. Okay. Okay. Yes. 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 Okay. So yes, I have connected. You know what? The ADHD girlies, my autism girlies. Come find me. I see y'all. Okay, we found each other. But yes, like there are spaces, and it was an interesting conversation too that was kind of happening about neurodivergence and how neurodivergent people are often like just really skilled in a particular thing. And I talk about how mine is process improvement. And also its relation. So like finding the pattern and kind of improving things that are like an issue systemically and kind of resolving them. Like that's one of my things. But like a same thing, like unless you create a space for people to thrive as they are in their neurodivergence or otherwise, how are we going to be able to tap in that skill? And that's honestly what I think. Like, if you can't create a space for Black women to thrive by fixing your HR processes and procedures, like, you don't need to be here. Woo, we are way off track, but that's okay. That's okay. Okay. Wait, no, CJ. CJ was like, I came into Wells Fargo through their neurodiversity program. What a joke. Wow. Honestly, Wells Fargo, allegedly, is the most is so performative, right? Like, y'all can't find any Black people. All right, cool. That's fine. There are plenty of Black leaders in finance. Okay. I've hired some of them. Okay. Um, so the last thing that so there's a couple other things I want to go through. Like, I will I will circle back. Sorry, y'all. Um, but it was about this idea of starting a business, right? And I'm gonna have a little plug for just a moment because that is one of the things that I think is true for me, right? Like, I'm in a place where I just left my 9 to 5. Thank you so much for liking the live and all the hearts and the love. I just want to say thank you. Um, but what I did is I left my 9 to 5 in January, right? I was in a similar place of just being like really frustrated and challenged, right? Over the years, not just recently, right? Of just like the dynamics that we have to deal with as Black women in the workplace, right? And in order for us to to build the wealth that we need, we do need a launch pad, right? We do need peace in our 9 to 5 in order to grow that business, right? Because I can tell you when I was reporting to these toxic supervisors, oh, I was reporting to them, there was no progress being made in my business. I was struggling, struggling in my business. It wasn't until I got into a place of greater peace at work, like I was reporting to um, more inclusive supervisors, true leaders, that it provided me the space to build my business, right? And it wasn't because I wasn't working, it was because the energy and the peace and the joy that I had from work each day trickled through after work, right? And I was able to use that same energy. It's why I was so excited to move into a DEI position because I love DEI. I love what it stands for. I've very much there's a neurodivergency, right? Like that justice need like the need to really see justice be done is definitely a neurodivergent trait, and I saw that in myself, and so that's why I love D&I. That's why I love seeing it in all different places, right? And so being in that space to have that energy that I did what I love, to be in a state of flow, to be working on projects that were exciting but like impactful, like meaningful projects, allowed that energy to flow through outside of my 9 to 5. So I was able to really focus on that. So what I'm doing is I'm building a community of Black women. I have a community called the Career Love Community. I'm expanding it with new resources, training, coaching opportunities, all of the above. But I think above all is like a really safe space for Black women. So honestly, the Black women that I attract in this community, because I am so intentional about how I show up, are just truly the sweetest people I have ever met. Like like truly loving, kind, the type of people that I want in a community. And so I'm just really excited to be creating this space for us where we can really grow and thrive together. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all of the likes on TikTok and YouTube and not Instagram, not Instagram. I don't know why I said that. LinkedIn, LinkedIn, TikTok, blah, blah, blah. So thank you. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a launch party for this new thing. I just finished mapping out all of the new content. So I'm going to be basically creating a new, like all of these things that I'm going to be doing to kind of bring this new version of this community to life and creating this space, this exciting space for Black women. So if you want to join, you can join my launch party using this QR code. If you are on TikTok right now, oh my gosh, TikTok, I'm sorry, because I'm transitioning to Fanbase off of TikTok. And so that link is not in my profile right now, but it will be later. But if you just go to mercedesswan.com or you click this QR code or whatever, you can go to the link in my profile to basically sign up. There is a banner on my website. You click it and then you can sign up to get registered for the launch party that's going into that, as well as access to the community as like a founding member of this new community. So, okay, so do that if you want to join. Okay, I think I caught up with all of the questions, but like, let me know. That's crazy. I think you might have actually told me that already, CJ. I'm so sorry that I forgot that. I think you already told me that you were in that diversity program. Okay. So I'm going to talk about a couple things about how to hold conversations with those toxic supervisors. I got all the way off track. I'm coming back. I'm coming back. Um, what was I? Okay, we talked about because I feel like that was an important thing. So focus on your locus of control, I think, is one of the things that's really important, right? Like we go into these conversations or these dynamics with toxic supervisors and we think that we're going to do something to control their behavior, right? We cannot control their behavior. We don't know what they will do. There's not enough thinking, right, that we can do. Like, sure, we can do certain things, which I'm going to talk to you about, like how to hold those conversations that are a little bit more helpful, that will lead to, I think, better outcomes, but there's nothing that we can do, right? And I told you how I always like I've seen what I need to see. Like I notice things. I read between the lines. I listen to what people are saying, but I also look at their behavior, right? And I compile what I feel like is evidence to understand who that person is as a leader, right? And I think what we have to do is take note and move accordingly, right? So I told you one of the things that I noticed is that I would be given direction, and then when I came back around, the direction was different. There was different expectations. And I think if I hadn't taken the time to say, like, why is this happening? Why do we keep having these same disagreements? Why do we keep having these same challenges? I would not have thought to implement that as a potential solution. So I need you all to start thinking about what is it that you can do? What's in your locus of control? What conversations can you have? What can you say or do to get you into a better place? Okay. All right. So any other questions? Let me see if I have any comments. Sorry, I kind of moved the tab to kind of share that you all can join my launch party. And I totally forgot to check on the comments. Okay. So here's some guidance on holding tough conversations with your supervisor. So what I would always recommend is to kind of have a little bit of a script going into whatever conversation that you are going to have. And what I always say is you want to, one, identify the behavior, identify how that behavior impacts you, and then you want to talk about like the solution, right? So again, what is the behavior that your toxic supervisor is doing? What is the impact on you, the organization, the team, whatever it is? What's the impact? And how can you move forward together in a better, more effective way? If you have the case where you aren't quite sure what conversation you should be having, the best way to figure that out is to ask yourself, what is it that you need or what is it that you want out of a situation, right? So if your supervisor is you feel like they're toxic but you haven't really considered why, then you need to say, okay, how is this making me feel and how do I want to feel differently, right? So if they're coming in, so let's say it like this. If they're coming in to tell you, like, oh, you need to do this right now. You need to drop all of this. Like, and you're like, oh my gosh, my supervisor's so toxic. They just want to come in and control all my work. Then what is it that you want, right? Like, oh, actually, I want to be able to better manage my work. I don't want to have emergencies. I want to be able to plan my work so I'm not stressed, right? So then the conversation is something like, I notice that every time, like every week or every day, you come into my office with a little bit of an emergency. I just wanted to let you know that coming into my office with these types of emergencies each day is really causing me to miss deadlines for other important projects that we've identified as a priority, right? So you're saying you're coming into my office with these emergencies, and this is causing these things to be delayed. One thing that's always helpful in this is to talk about your intent, right? So your intent in this is to ensure that everything runs smoothly, to ensure that we meet all of our projects, that we accomplish them all on time. Whatever you want to say is the reason why this is important to you, right? We have the same goal. Get on the same page with them. We want the same things. We both want to be successful. We both want the team to work, right? And I know y'all gonna be like, they don't want the same thing. They just want to control me. I know, but like it's for the productivity of the conversation. Get them on the same page as you so that they know that you want what they want, right? You want the team to be successful, you want to make the customer happy, whatever. And then you can leave it open. So what I always say is helpful in these conversations is to be curious. I think I said that a lot for our other conversations, but like be curious. And again, that comes in with like we make assumptions about what we think our supervisor wants or why they're doing and all these other kind of things. Like be curious and just ask open-ended questions. So you could ask something like, how can we manage these last minute requests in a way that allows me to still meet our ongoing project deadlines or deliverables, right? And so you could say something like, how can I maybe learn more about what these last minute projects are so I can accommodate them? Or maybe we can set a timeline for these if it's not that urgent, right? And a lot of times there is a way for your supervisor. I've seen this all the time. It's like, it's not really, you knew about this weeks ago. You just didn't tell me, right? And so you can have conversations where maybe your supervisor is like, oh, okay, maybe in our check ins, we'll talk about upcoming projects. So that allows us to be a little bit more specific and attentive to what's coming down the pipeline. So then that's not an emergency for you. And this is going to give you a lot of understanding about whether your supervisor is doing it on purpose or not. If they make a change or an effort, it doesn't matter if it doesn't, let me say this. People are people, right? You're a person who needs grace, and sometimes your supervisor is also a person that needs grace. Okay? We're not talking about intentionally acting in bad faith. We're talking about assuming positive intent. Your supervisor is a person also. They don't change behavior overnight. They don't get everything perfect, right? So have these conversations and be okay seeing things happening and shifting over time. Remind them what you need. Remind them of what you agreed upon, right? So that you can move forward. Okay. So if they do it again tomorrow and you'd be like, oh, remember we had that conversation about how I really was hoping that we'd be able to better manage like new competing priorities in a different way, like you can have that conversation in a way that's productive. I know. Okay, so let me know if that script was a little bit helpful for you in some of the difficult conversations that you're having at work. Let me know. I'll look quiet today, but that's okay. Well, TikTok is not quiet. TikTok is never quiet. Y'all on YouTube and LinkedIn are quiet. So say hello, okay? Um, okay. So next thing, so there's two more just strategies, and then again, I'll open up to any questions. One thing that I think we do often is that we're emotional when we're having those types of conversations. I'm not saying you can't be emotional. I'm not saying to put your emotions aside, but I think when we're having those conversations, we really need to focus on the facts, right? So if your supervisor comes in and again, it's an emergency, they're messing up your whole day, they're throwing off your calendar, you're missing other deadlines, you're working late because of all these emergencies. You don't need to say something like, I feel like you're just being unfair, or I feel like you're not respecting my boundaries, right? Like, yes, those are true. There your feelings are like, oh my gosh, it makes me so angry when you just come in my office like that. Those are true. Those are emotions. But what are the facts here? The facts that are relevant to your job is that every time your supervisor comes in and puts something new on your plate without reprioritizing things, deadlines are not being met. If your supervisor and also it's important to know about what your supervisor cares about, right? To better have this conversation. And I'm not talking about manipulating people. I'm talking about the strategic piece of like understanding where the pieces come together, right? So if your supervisor really cares, sorry, I'm talking too much. If your supervisor really cares about essentially what leadership wants, like, oh, leadership really wants this report, leadership really wants us to grow in this way, right? We'll say, oh, well, this is going to support that goal for leadership, right? What does your supervisor want, and how can you pull this dynamic into that, right? If your supervisor cares about reports being done on time, adding this to my workload at 4:30 at the afternoon does not allow me to complete the reports. Okay. Like, let's build the connection. Get on the same page. We're all working towards the same thing and know what the priorities are. And a lot of times sometimes we don't know what our supervisor's priorities are. Communication. Okay. And also, one of the things I remember, I talked about this in my case when I was talking about, how I had submitted a case for a raise that wasn't approved, right? And I chose to not hold the conversation. I was pissed, and I was in I was traveling at the time, so like it was no way for me to like shut down away from the person. Um, but I did not have that conversation when it just happened, right? Because I knew I was pissed. I knew I was really upset. I knew I was not gonna have that conversation in a constructive way that was actually gonna get me to what I wanted, which was my raise. And so, with love a Scorpio, Taurus rising. It was rough. Um, but what I'm saying here is like, yes, advocate for yourself, but make sure, and again, that's the importance of that script of like, make sure that you have what you need to have that conversation, when you need to have it, how you need to have it, and have really thought about the impacts, what's going on. And again, if you are truly in a situation where this is not just like a toxic supervisor, like this is a truly hostile supervisor, right? You might need to have that conversation with somebody else, but it's the same structure. Okay. All right. Get out of Wells Fargo. Okay, so I think in this that I want to wrap up by saying, and like, of course, I want to hear any other thoughts that you all have, any other questions that you all have. But like, what I really think about this is that like our ancestors who are not here, but also our ancestors who are currently working, right? Our grandma, our moms, our sisters, right? I think that they are used to Black women trying to have space to just exist. And by that I mean like we are trying to create a space here where we can work and where we can exist. And that's just been good enough to just be able to get a paycheck. And what I want for Black women is for us to be in a space where we get the paycheck, but we get the respect and we get what we deserve. And I think that uh, I never want to dismiss what we had to do to get to where we are, right? Like we had to kind of align and adhere to the standards and the behaviors that were expected of us, right? In order to get a degree, get a job, right? But I think a lot of us are not all of us, but a lot of us do have more leverage than we think that we do due to the value that we provide and the work that we do and how Black women just truly lead. And I think that the more of us who can be empowered by setting the record straight, by having the uncomfortable conversations, and by understanding that Black women are not just going to let you slide. We're not just going to let you disrespect us and move forward. We're going to set that boundary and we're going to hold you accountable for your behavior. I think we as a community and a group can do a little bit better at that and not being afraid to talk about those things because again, like I'm not just thinking about me, but I'm also thinking about the next generation of Black women who deserve better, right? And I think the closer and closer that we get to having power, the economic power of having successful careers and businesses, the more stability and security that we can have to do these types of things and support our community. So, like, this is why this is all important for me. As we're going, I would love to know, like, you all have been here for a little bit. I love y'all for hanging out with me for over an hour. Thank you. I would love to know, like, what's your number one takeaway from this conversation? Like, what did you learn? What are you doing? I want to know. I'm also really clear, like, I would love to know on YouTube, like, please drop it in the chat, and same thing on TikTok. But also if you're on LinkedIn and you're not really feeling like you can have that conversation on LinkedIn because your supervisor's on there, members of your team, like, send me a message. I think that putting things into writing or verbalizing them is really powerful for us, like, moving forward, right? Like, saying what we're going to do, saying what our challenge, what our next steps and how we're going to navigate the challenges that we have kind of creates life in that. So let me know in the comments what you're going to do, what your takeaway is. And CJ's like, gonna look for a lawyer. Yes, because Queen of Palmettos is like, go find one, girl. They on Instagram. Yes, for community. That's what we need. Okay. So, as we wrap, I just wanted to share again, my goal in this is for Black women, for us to have this community. Yes, for the community happening in the comments. Yes, for the community being built on LinkedIn, on TikTok, on YouTube. But I also would love for you to join my community. So if you want to come to my launch party, learn more about the community, learn what I'm doing to build this space where Black women are building successful careers where they thrive, businesses that really like are monetized and aligned with our gifts and our talents and our purpose, like that's what we're doing. And then also in a way that supports our lifestyle, right? Like I don't like what is the point in building this career and this lifestyle or this career in this business when it doesn't ultimately support like how we want to show up, right? And I talk about this idea of black women bliss. Like what does it mean to live in our bliss? And that's what I'm trying to create. Like I wanted to be a movement of black women in our ease and our soft era and just truly enjoying and loving life. So if that resonated, go ahead and join me for my launch party. I saw somebody already join me, already signed up, but make sure you do that. If you are on YouTube and LinkedIn, that is going to be in my profile. If you are on TikTok, it's not going to be in my profile because I'm trying to migrate to fan base. But like send me a message and I'll send you the direct link to sign up or whatnot. Okay. Or scan the QR code. Okay, y'all. Do we have any questions? Yes, CJ, I know you're signed up. I saw you. CJ was like, I asked CJ asked before I started the launch party where I had the launch party up. Like CJ's like, I'm going. We're going together. We're growing. We're building wealth. We're cultivating our bliss. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, last thing that I'll say before I close is thank you so much. Stay accountable to those goals. Go get that lawyer, girl. Go get the lawyer. And I always want to just express gratitude. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thanks for building this community. I'm so excited. And I will see you for tomorrow's clock out, which is what is DEI really? And why is it really never going away? So there's a lot of dialogue. There was a lot of dialogue at the end of last year about Walmart when Walmart basically said they were shutting down their DEI programs. Now we see a lot more organizations, companies, whatever, pulling back from DE&I because it was performative in the first place. And there's actually a lot that's going on with DEI leaders in the background looking for what that looks like in a corporate space when we think about legislation. So I think that we are missing a key piece of what's going on with DE&I and how it's really not dying, how it's really not gone, and what we can do to kind of continue to support that and listen to the organizations that are strategically retitling DE&I to continue with the movement, and for organizations that are really backing away from DE&I because they were never about it in the first place. Okay, so that's what we're doing tomorrow. I hope to see you all at 6 during the clock out, and thank you for all the love. Thank you for all of the gifts. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being you. Right, and even being bold enough to like come to this conversation, right? Because something about you said, you know what? I do need to stand on business. I do need to stand up for myself. I do need people to understand that we're not disrespecting black women in the workplace anymore. Okay, I've rambled. I'm rambling, but I love y'all. And I will see you tomorrow. Okay. Bye. Bye. Bye-bye. I should start singing a little song. Should I sing? No, okay. I can't sing, but I would have to write a